On today's agenda, I'll be providing some background information on evidence-based practices, some literacy resources, and then we'll take some questions. Um, so evidence-based practices are, or what you'll commonly see referred to as EBPs, are the use of research and data to guide decisions and improve outcomes. At the heart of evidence-based practice is the idea that good decision making is achieved through critical appraisal of the best available evidence from multiple sources. When we say evidence, we mean information, facts, or data supporting, or in some cases contradicting, a claim, assumption, or hypothesis. What are some of the benefits of evidence based practices? Improved outcomes for students, informed decisions, and high quality services. Recall the Vermont model for improvement that we often refer to. The third question that you see in this graphic, what change or changes can we make that will result in improvement, relates directly to the selection of evidence based change ideas based on your previous data analysis, root cause analysis, and goals that you've established. Your change ideas will come from examining the research and evidence based and then finding the practices, processes, and programs that have demonstrated positive impacts on similar specific outcomes and student populations that you were hoping to impact with your goals. You will select evidence-based change ideas and or practices based on the needs you uncover during your data analysis. In order to achieve integrity and implementation, you must describe the practice, program, or process with enough detail to ensure that everyone understands the what, how, where, when, and why factors of implementation. Also, you want to consider the human, fiscal, and other necessary resources needed to ensure fidelity and integrity of implementation. The Every Student Succeeds Act, often referred to as ESSA, contains provisions related to the specific types of evidence from research that one should consider when assessing potential efficacy of a change idea. For example, we'll take schools identified for equity support improvement if you are in equity 2 or 3 status, also referred to as targeted support for improvement TSI or additional targeted support and improvement ATSI. You must include interventions or practices that are evidence based according to the 4 ESSA levels of evidence you see on this slide. At this time, I will turn it over to my colleagues who will walk us through some literacy resources.
You, Josh. I am Emily Loita. I'm the English Language Arts and Literacy Specialist, and I'm going to be talking about some literacy resources. I also have colleagues from my team who will be talking about math and science resources as well. So what you can see on the screen now is an example of the newest documents that we've published related to evidence-based practices. Since I'm the ELA and literacy specialist, the example I'm going to walk you through is an ELA example. For content areas that are represented in the What Works Clearinghouse practice guides, each document is based on one of the guides. So in this case, it is the foundational skills to support reading for understanding in kindergarten through 3rd grade. Each of these documents contains a link to the practice guide. So you can see that down under the purpose where it says What Works Clearinghouse practice guide, there's a link to the guide itself. The grade, level, or band the practices support. So in this case, it is the kindergarten through grade 3 band. We also have connections to the new education quality standards. So this particular guide or practice guide is connected to 2120.1 and 2120.6. And there's also a table containing each evidence-based practice with a link providing more specificity, the ESSA levels of evidence, and suggestions for implementation. So if you look at that left-hand column where it says evidence-based practice, if you clicked on that link, it takes you to the exact spot in the practice guide where it talks about that specific practice. And then also goes through some of those suggestions for implementation and some more detailed classroom examples and whatnot. And so right now, all of these documents can be found on the Read Vermont webpage under the evidence-based resources section. And we also will be linking them to the end of this presentation. So you can go to the, yeah, thank you. Switch my slide. And then finally, following each table is a list of research and other resources for implementation. So more resources to help you with this practice. Evidence-based literacy resources. We've got some more documents that have been on the AOE website for a while that I'm just going to refamiliarize you with. The first link on this slide goes to the evidence-based practices section right on the AOE's ELA and literacy webpage. And when I'm asked about evidence-based practices, my first step is often to go to the IES What Works Clearinghouse practice guides. So I've included an example, which is again that foundational skills to support reading for understanding in kindergarten through third grade. On my webpage, I've created documents that break down each recommendation from 3 of the particularly helpful practice guides related to literacy. The next slide is going to walk you through what you'll find in each of these recommendation breakdown documents. Each breakdown document is named after the recommendation. So this one comes from the practice guide, the foundational skills one that we've been looking at. And the name of the recommendation is Teach Students to Decode Words, Analyze Word Parts, and Write and Recognize Words. So similarly to that other table, you'll see the recommendation, you'll see the level of evidence. This one has tier 1 or strong evidence. And then you'll see those suggestions from the practice guides of how to carry out the recommendation. And on these documents, each suggestion is followed by the page numbers of the practice guide where you can find even more information about the suggestion. And this includes classroom examples. And then finally, each recommendation breakdown document includes a crosswalk with Michigan's literacy essentials, which I will explain on the next slide. A few years ago, the AOE's Early Learning Networked Improvement Community for Literacy worked with Nell Duke using these literacy essentials to inform our change ideas. Dr. Duke was instrumental in creating these documents. The first link takes you to the Essential Practices homepage. There are essential practices at the classroom level as well as the systems level. And there are also instructional videos and modules walking through some of these documents, which I have found to be extremely helpful. I also want to make a nod to adolescent literacy. I do not yet have a recommendation breakdown for this practice guide, but it's a very valuable resource for supporting adolescents. And even though it is designed as an interventions document, it can also be used in Tier 1 universal instruction and is very helpful in that case as well. And then the last thing that I would like to talk to you about before I turn it over to my colleague is to remind you about Read Vermont. Read Vermont is a comprehensive initiative dedicated to improving literacy outcomes for all Vermont students so that they may experience the joy and utility of reading. You can visit our webpage for professional learning opportunities, evidence-based resources, guidance around Act 139 implementation, resources for parents and guardians, and more. Now I will hand it over to Rachel.
Hello, my name is Rachel Ledwidge, and I am the math specialist here on the proficiency-based learning team at AOE. And similar to the ELA resources, we've put together evidence-based practices from the What Works Clearinghouse guides from the 6 most universally applicable guides. So the example here that we're showing is the evidence-based practices for assisting students struggling with mathematics intervention in the early elementary grades. So you can see that the same introduction is there. So if you are looking for all of the practice guides, that first link for What Works Clearinghouse practice guides is there first. And then the specific guide is linked below in the middle of the screen along with the grade band. It's very similar to the ELA. On the next slide. Again, we have the evidence-based practice on the left-hand column that is linked to that specific page number of the guide. In the middle column provides the level of evidence and then the suggestions for implementation. On the last page, next slide. There's the research and extra resources for implementation that are found on the What Works Clearinghouse website, as well as some other resources depending on the particular practice guide. And I will turn it over to science.
Hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Rossman. I'm the science specialist on the proficiency-based learning team at the Agency of Education. And different from ELA and math, I found it, in my research, I found it difficult to find ESSA-tiered science evidence-based practices that were not focused on a particular or specific program. However, there are evidence-based practices that exist and can have tremendous value in the science classroom. And I'm going to highlight 3 different collections of practices that are applicable to science. The first one is from What Works Clearinghouse. It's a practice guide that it's a little dated. It's from 2007. However, the pedagogy built into this practice guide is still really valid. And the tables are set up the same way. It has the evidence-based practice on the left-hand column, as a tier level noted, and then suggestions for implementation specific to science classrooms. So one second. Okay, sorry about that. This resource I found has this really strong potential to be used in the science classroom. Other practices that are included in this document are space learning over time, using quizzing to promote learning, and helping students to learn how to effectively allocate time and use data to identify their strengths and gaps in their learning. Next slide, please. At the end of that document, there's a list of research and resources that can be helpful for educators in planning or using suggestions for implementation. And then, although not ESSA-tiered, extensive research has been done in the scientific community to determine the best pedagogy in K-12 science classrooms. This is an example of an evidence-based science practice from the National Resource Council's framework for K-12 science education. The other practices highlighted in this document include, sorry about that, my slides got a little advanced. The other practices highlighted in this document include storylining, the science and engineering practices, and using disciplinary core ideas to anchor student learning, retention, and transferability. Similarly to the WWC practice previously shown, a research and resources list will be available at the end of this document. This is an example of some practice strategies pulled from the ELA ESSA-tiered evidence-based practices that are transferable to science. It's important to highlight that many of ELA practices, and similarly with math practices, can also be used in other content areas. This specific example is from the evidence-based practice for improving reading comprehension for grades kindergarten through 3. Teaching literacy skills through experiential real-world science instruction significantly enhances students' ability to retain and transfer those skills across academic disciplines and into real-life contexts. When students engage in hands-on investigations, collaborative discussions, and scientific writing rooted in phenomenon-based learning, they use reading, writing, speaking, and listening in meaningful and purposeful ways. This authentic application supports long-term retention because students are not just practicing isolated literacy tasks, they are using language to solve problems, construct explanations, and communicate findings. These integrated experiences also improve transferability as students are better able to apply argumentation, evidence-based reasoning, and domain-specific vocabulary in other content areas in future learning situations. Back to Emily.
Thanks, Catherine. So this is a slide that just has the links to the evidence-based practices for ELA and literacy. The slide deck will be available as a PDF, so folks can click on the links. And then the next slide is similarly the math practices. And I believe that is it for us.
The science practices
Also-
will be, sorry, real quick. The science
Sorry.
practices will be available in that similar format. They are being finalized and getting ready to be published.